As we come to the final episode of season 2 of Who Let the Dogma Out, we find the church at a pivotal time. We find a church at a time in which megachurch era ended, the emerging church era ended. What will the next era be? Is a question before us today. We find ourselves in a time where we're more culturally irrelevant than perhaps at any point in American history. The church has no impact whatsoever on culture and the slide that it's undergoing. We find ourselves entering generation number 3 of losing the majority of our own youth who were born and raised in the church. Times are dire. The church has to make some key decisions, and the question stands before us: what is next? As we enter into this time of America, what seems to be America's decline, what will the church do? What will the church look like? How will the church restore its influence in the world? How will it restore its conversion of its own people and retention of our youth? How will it re-evangelize a culture that has turned away from God? What will be done? For this final episode, we want to talk about dividing lines in today's Christianity. We want to talk about what we're calling make or break decisions that will determine exactly what will come of the future of the church here in America. Lord willing, if we're given the years, we think if we get these make or break decisions right, we can see the church return to a place of strength. But we have to do it God's way. We have to make the decisions that haven't been made for so long, that are staring us in the face at this crucial turning point. Welcome to Who Let the Dogma Out, where doctrine has dominion over all of life. I'm joined once again by Titus Anderson and Daniel Mayfield, and kind of crazy that we've gotten through 12 already. As I said last week, we will not take the 8-month break that we did last time before we get back at it, but we all do need a bit of a break. And so, how you guys doing?
Doing great. As you, those who are watching the video can see, I've constructed a new podcast studio since the last episode. Just kind of put some of these fake books behind me. Broadcasting
cardboard boxes.
Yeah, they're not. None of those are real. But anyhow, yeah, I'm excited for the season finale. I'm wondering what our big cliffhanger is going to be for this season. You know, what kind of shocking revelations are going to be made in this season finale. It's got to be a big one.
My initials are JR. I just hope nobody shoots me. Some people get that reference, some will not. I didn't see that show. I just know it's a big cultural reference.
Jack, how old are you?
Yeah, I know that had to be before I was born, but sorry, we just made some of the listeners feel really old because they probably remember watching it live, but I don't know. Daniel, what about you? Doing all right?
Yeah, doing solid. Just as we were talking about before, just accidentally breaking things at my house and then having to fix them. I find that a lot of my projects are self-created. I go in to fix something and make something worse, and then I get to spend a lot of time fixing it. So that's what I've been doing.
It's a good way to learn new skills. Just put yourself to work.
It is. I'm putting myself through trade school, basically.
Right. There you go. All right. Well, as I said, make or break issues is the title of this episode. We took a little time figuring out what we wanted to do to end the season off, and I think this is a good point to do so. We've touched on all of these things lightly in passing as we touched on other subjects a little bit more specifically, but we really are at this point where the church has to decide what are we going to do about the things that we're about to talk about these issues that are staring us in the face. Some of them I think we realize are staring us in the face. We're going to talk about sexuality and LGBT issues and things like that, but I don't think I think there are other more underlying issues as well. We talk a lot about theological minimalism. Where that starts is with an understanding of God's holiness. So that's going to be number 1 on our list of make or break decisions for the church. Are we going to emphasize and understand and appreciate God's holiness? Why have we not? Or I guess I should say, how have we not? Where are we at a point where we've lost that? What are some signs people might recognize?
I think culturally, this is something that at one point in time was baked in. You hear people talk about this idea that, maybe in the 50s or 60s, I don't know, whatever idyllic time period you want to think of, that say you have like a storefront and you have 6 biker dudes hanging out front and they're cursing up a storm. They're telling, depraved jokes. And then when an old lady walks by, what do? They stop talking like that. Or when, basically this idea that, hey, when somebody of respect or somebody that's respectable comes near me, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to change my actions. And culturally, again, not saying people were perfect back then, but there was an understanding that there's a separation of crassness and sin versus respectable, holy living, if you will. And so I think we've lost that completely culturally. And that kind of shift has happened in the church, but it's not just with, little old ladies or, an elderly gentleman that walks by and we don't really have that ingrained respect. It's disseminated, all the way up to God. And, we aren't Catholics. We don't have the traditional Latin mass. We don't wear robes or vestures or things like that. At least at my congregation, we're not quite to the come as you are and shorts and flip-flops. But at the same time, looking at, the traditional service in a church, it can be kind of laid back. And because of that, maybe not just solely because of it, I think we get comfortable in a way that the Bible's portrayal of God's holiness doesn't really show. Again, that level of, I can just come in, kind of hang out, and maybe I'll sing a few songs. I think just pragmatically, our thoughts as we come to worship, our thoughts as we think about Christianity in general have really underplayed God's holiness.
Yeah. I think we don't like the idea of a holy God, which we're seeing a shift happening, but we've not liked the idea of a holy God because a holy God demands a holy people. You therefore must be holy as I am holy. And if God is apathetic toward our sin, if God's standards are really low, if God says over every single sin that we do, oh, you're just human, then what that does is it allows us to carry on in sort of this nonchalant, apathetic way. But really, the spirit of the Christian age right now is very tepid. We're lukewarm. I mean, Jesus, if he hasn't already, he's fixing to spit us out of his mouth. And what we're going to need to do, I think you spoke to the symptoms really clearly there, Titus, about, the idea of, certain things being out of place. That's certainly the issue, but what we're going to need to do is reestablish the picture of Jesus on the throne with eyes of flame, a sword coming out of his mouth, and a voice like many waters. I see that and I think, oh man, okay, this is not just, this soft-spoken Jewish man that The Chosen is portraying. No, he's the living God on a throne, and that changes how I approach him.
For sure. You think about, and Titus, you're getting at this a little bit with the dress thing. We're such a casual society, and you think about how many things do we really hold in awe? We really, the heroes that we have, the places, the things like that, where it's just kind of like that's special, that's set apart, that's different. We don't really have anything like that anymore. Everything's casual. Everything's brought down. We've talked before about like even in movies and TV, the good guys aren't really that good. There's no, wow, Superman, man, he's amazing. No, he's just one of us. Has the same struggles we do. And you think the TV commercials that were real big earlier this year, he gets us. God's just like us. No, he's not. He's not like us at all. He can sympathize with our weaknesses. Absolutely. He's not like us. He doesn't get us in that same way. He doesn't have the weaknesses we have. And anything that you can look at is just like, wow, this is this perfect standard. No, we have such a mindset to tear down accomplishment, to tear down better, to tear down, to bring everything down to the same level. Nothing's better than anything else. Well, God's better than us. That's what it means that he's holy. We don't really even know what it means that he's holy. We sing holy, holy, holy. I don't think a lot of people have a concept of it. It's that he's better than us in every way, in untouchable ways. He dwells in unapproachable light, or he's so far above us, as the stars are above the I'm butchering like 5 different Bible verses in the same quote here. You guys know what I'm referencing, but yeah, he's better than us. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I want to put one point of clarity. So he understands. We had the lesson on the dual nature of Jesus. He understands us, but in his understanding of us, he's calling us out of it. He's calling us away from it. He's calling us to holiness, right? Jesus, when he went to the sinners, they loved him. They loved being around him, and he loved them. And he understood their struggles, but he said, go and sin no more. The physician, a person who's totally well doesn't need a physician. He came to call us out of these things that, we're just okay with.
Any view, and I think we're going to hit this a couple times as we go through this episode. As we say this, I don't think any of us want to give the impression that God, I'm telling you, his standard of grace, if he's going to give you grace, his standard is just higher than we've taught. I mean, God is gracious. He's outpouring in grace. He welcomes sinners. He loves sinners. But any kind of frame of mindset that makes sin not that big of a deal and says, well, sin, you're a sinner, but we're all sinners. Sin's just not that big of a deal. That's going to be a fallacious mindset any way you look at it. If we're going to feel comfort, it's got to be in making God's grace bigger and God's loving kindness bigger, not basically comforting ourselves and saying, well, my sin's just not that big of a deal. My sin just doesn't matter that much to God. And I think, as we're talking about this, and it's kind of coming to mind, God's holiness, it's hard when we don't have a tabernacle. We don't have, a pillar of fire. We don't have this big ornate kind of, again, say what you will about the Catholic Church, stand in front of or inside of a cathedral, and all of a sudden this religion feels big and bigger than you, and, something kind of unattainable. We don't have that. We don't have the Old Testament, iconography, if you will. But I still think we have to, in our own way, reach for that holiness. And one way that it shows out to me, in worship service, I lead singing almost every Sunday. And this is just me kind of speaking my struggles out loud here. Sometimes there's opportunities, depending on the announcement that was made before, or something that's going on in my life, or something that happened, kind of these faux pas that happen in the middle of the service, a baby screams or something. There's an opportunity to kind of make a light comment or something funny that is going to get a laugh out of the congregation. And I've done that before. I've done it kind of in the moment. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with making a comment or being, adding lightheartedness to a sermon or whatever. But there are moments where I go, if I do this, what am I going to be drawing the attention to? Am I drawing the attention to myself, how funny I am? Because I am very, very funny. And basically making people laugh at me and going like, I'm in the presence and worshiping a holy God right now. It's not lighthearted as far as me coming to him. He's the focus. And I think it's the same thing I've also noticed with baptisms. Baptism is a wonderful, miraculous thing. God is, ushering people into his church. I've been backstage at some baptism prep where people are getting ready, and people seem uncomfortable to even be talking like really in a spiritual way. They're making jokes about, oh, these waders I'm wearing, man, I think they're 2 sizes too big, or, and the pats on the back. But I've almost noticed, again, we're very uncomfortable around the idea of holiness, or, there's something special happening here. And it goes back to, again, that difficulty of mindset of just saying, let's let ourselves be drawn into something is really going on here. We really are worshiping a real God who is really holy. And it's just something that even my opinions that I've thrown out, maybe you feel 100% differently if you're listening, but at least we need to be thinking about the holiness of God and how that relates to our interactions.
I think with a lot of this, we talk about it being make or break in our relation to the culture. And we think, man, if we just downplay this stuff and make God one of us, that was the outrage. He gets us. But what you see is the opposite, is people going to the high church thing, going to Orthodoxy, Anglicanism, Catholicism, the things where they've got the really ornate buildings and the guys in the funny hats and the robes and all that, because they want something different. Kind of like you're saying, we're not used to moments of holiness, different, of like, wow, I'm stepping outside of the other world into a different world, like the normal world into a different world. And so we really try and downplay that to make everybody comfortable. No, let's not do that. Let's go the other way and emphasize God's holiness, that this is different. And this really blends into the second point. So I'm just going to bring them together. is that we start living this out practically as not worldly Christians, not being like them. And I think I wrote on this a month or two ago that I really think this is the biggest where you see churches dividing and churches are going one of two directions. And this is the dividing line. There are churches that are telling the world we're just like you. And there are churches that are telling the world we're not anything like you. Come be part of something better. And for shorthand on the outline, I put it as Andy Stanleyism versus Doug Wilsonism. Some people will know those names and know exactly what that means. Essentially, it's the Christians, the churches that are just telling people, man, I know some of the Bible, it's really hard to accept. And man, some of this is really weird. And so we're just going to make it as comfortable for you as possible for you to come in, sit in a pew, enjoy yourself, not have to change, not be any different versus, right. Hey, this is hard. Come be part of it. That's why you should want to be part of it. It's different. It's a change and deny your worldly self and come into something new.
Right. Yeah. I like that, Titus started bringing it, and Jack, you did as well. The lack of comfort that we have with holiness, it's almost like it's not just that we're not used to it, but that there's something that we almost feel awkward about it. And so we in any moment that's somber, because the thing is, worship is truly, it's an exposed state. We're standing before God totally open, or we ought to be, right? We are in the light. We're completely in the light, and lost Jack's video there. We're completely in the light, and we're completely vulnerable, and it's intimate, and there's a sense of being exposed, and we just don't like that. We want to remain in this kind of hidden. I think that's part of it. I don't know. Maybe there's something related to what happened with Adam and Eve going on there, where we're hiding behind a rock, or we're sewing some fig leaves onto ourselves, and we don't want to come in because we know if I step into the presence of God with complete openness and humility, then I'm either going to be exposed as a fraud or something like that. We have to get holy on this personal, practical level if we're going to do that. And I think the big area that needs to be focused in our churches, in the leadership, in the pulpit, is helping Christians develop a Christian mindset, a mind that is transformed, a mind that thinks like Christ, one that is thinking like the Spirit, having a truly Christian worldview. Because right now what we have is a hodgepodge of kind of piecemeal rules and this very narrow category of spiritual things that usually has to do with just a 2-hour assembly on Sunday. Outside of that, we don't really know. How should I be thinking about my job? How should I be thinking about? So that's a huge part of it, is recognizing we have to be exposed and humble, but we also need to have a truly Christian worldview.
Yeah. You said Andy Stanleyism versus Doug Wilsonism. I think about the fact that I don't know for how many years, and I don't know what all times he comes on, but I know for years Andy Stanley has covered the slot right after Saturday Night Live on TV. You basically you have a preacher who he's coming on right after a show that's watched by hundreds of thousands of people. I think a lot less now, because probably for obvious reasons. But you have a preacher who's trying to basically follow maybe at this point one of the most socially, politically perverted, entertainment things that's going on to the mass audience. And he's trying to basically keep that audience in the first 5 minutes. If you're going to do that, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to throw holiness and any kind of difference of Christianity and God out the window, and just talk to people as if you're talking just like a motivational speaker, like somebody that's, wanting to help make their life better. And so, I think, like Daniel was saying, there's an intimate connection between what happens in the worship, the way we approach worship, and our outside life, because again, it's constantly in my mind. I think in the Church of Christ, we think we've done Jesus a service by creating two boxes, and we say, here's our spiritual box, and here's our secular world box, and we've put all the spiritual stuff in the spiritual box, and we've protected it from the secularity of the world, right? So we can do all this stuff in our secular life, and that has nothing to do with our Christian life. And what it creates is, like Daniel says, it's just a hodgepodge, weak worldview to where, again, we think, well, I can live like, if there's no difference between you and 95% of your neighbors, except for 2 hours on Sunday, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. And so many people in our churches look and live exactly like the standard suburban American. And you just look at it and go, surely this is not what God meant. Surely it's not just, be distinct, be a peculiar people. And that's that you don't have a piano on stage versus everybody else does. I mean, if that's going to be the totality of what makes us distinct, then we've missed it.
You think there's a lot of Christians that would probably be comfortable with saying, man, we are starting to look a lot like Sodom and Gomorrah, and amen, brother. Amen, brother. Do you think Lot was watching the same TV shows as everybody in Sodom? Do you think he was going to the same place? They didn't have TV. You know what I'm saying? That he was living the same way as them? Of course not. I'm sure it says righteous Lot was tormented day after day, looking around going, this is all awful. If he was living exactly like them, he wouldn't have stood out. There wouldn't have been anything different about him. He wouldn't have been saved. I mean, you remember Abraham negotiating. Lot was the guy. He was the guy there who was different, who stood out. And when God looks at America, well, we watch the same TV shows as everybody else. We go to the same movies as everybody else. Our churches have At the Movies sermon series where we decorate. I just saw, it was at Life Church, decorated their whole building like Star Wars, not for Vacation Bible School, for their Sunday worship, because we don't hold God as holy. So we don't act like he's holy. Then we, in our personal lives, we don't live as holy. And so we want to bring that into church so we're not uncomfortable there. And it's just this snowball effect that is awful.
Well, there's something spiritual that happens within a major production. Like it's been interesting watching America's Got Talent and shows that are similar to that, and hearing these secular guys on stage, Simon Cowell, who, he always, it's almost like that is his liturgy. That is his place of worship. And he'll sit there and he the hair stands up on the back of his neck as he hears this awesome performance, this person with a beautiful voice, or these people that put so much time into this production. And I think we love it because it's experiential and it's emotional and it speaks to something transcendent. And yet there's absolutely no standard there. So society is drawn to it because it speaks to kind of that inner stuff, but the God on the other end of it is just a couple of performers who themselves are living like vagabonds and they don't expect anything. And so you can carry on, you can get this sense of awe, which I think you sometimes see that in these mega church productions, but it's really lacking. I mean, it's just a weak facade. It's a smokescreen. And there's something so much deeper that goes to the core. And what we need to bring back into the church is this idea that all of life is a kind of worship. And I know that we don't like saying that, but in Romans chapter 12, look, Paul says, present your bodies. I mean, this is at the end of this major theological treatise, Romans 1-11. That's the most profound exposition of the gospel that exists in the Bible. He says in Romans 12, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies to God as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Somebody's going to say, no, it's spiritual service. No, it's talking in the context of the Levitical rites of the Levites would go in and they'd offer to God these things. That's what he's talking about. And he's saying that's your body. I mean, that's every day, every moment, every breath, every waking hour. My body is God's. And God, how can I use it now for you? When you come into worship on Sunday with that mentality that you've had all week, you're bringing something different than the person who's been watching TV and then shows up to say, hey, God, let's do a couple songs.
Yeah, I feel like Life Church definitely missed out. If they're doing Star Wars, I mean, I feel like you got to do the Barbenheimer worship service for this Sunday, right? I mean, get Barbie with an atomic bomb behind her. Yeah. Anyway,
Yes.
I've been waiting to say that for about 3 minutes, so forgive me for bringing that back up.
Excellent.
But you know, I think what's interesting is that what we think, I mean, the virtue of our day is authenticity. People think, well, being authentic is the most important thing, and that's why we hate ceremony. We hate having to go to the courthouse and sign a marriage certificate. Man, love, they're just putting shackles on love. I mean, it should just be, we hate that because we think it goes against authenticity. But in a weird way, I think what people want, and again, if someone thinks people want a Star Wars worship service, they want, relevant, pop culture references. What people really want from us, I think, is to be real. Okay. They want us to be real. And this is something that the fakeness shows through in the Star Wars service. And at times, I'll just be honest, in the ultra conservative service on a Sunday that acts as if we're living, in a total bubble away from the world, it's also fake. It's also not real. It's not speaking to any real issues that are going on in the world. And what I think you hit on earlier with, the Simon Cowell and his liturgy of talent, I think there's something that people, and we've talked about the people coming in post-COVID that are looking for something. Our world is so clinical and naturalistic and dead that magic of any kind, and I don't mean magic as in pulling a rabbit out of the hat, I mean the beauty of the universe is totally downplayed, and people are looking for that. And if we as the church, when we look at the differences, what holiness is going to lead us to act differently, I think we have an opportunity to be totally real with people, because sometimes on YouTube you see this guy walking down the sidewalk. He's just like a guy, and he's saying, have you noticed how none of us are happy anymore? Have you noticed how we're all scrambling from here to there, and there's no meaning in our life, and we feel empty and dead on the inside? And have you noticed that you have a hard time sleeping at night because you just feel like you're, and this gets millions of views and people saying, this guy's speaking truth, like I feel totally empty. And the reason that is because we're missing a component of, again, that magic of the world in our lives. And as we present a holy God to people, it doesn't have to be all, I mean, it is hellfire and brimstone to an extent, but it's also, look, the world is beautiful. Holiness is beautiful. Living unto God is beautiful. And I think, again, it does, and that's why I think the Amish, the Mennonite mindset, the cloister yourself away and have no interaction with the world mindset is so self-defeating, because it's not real. That's not the real world. The real world is, we have a beautiful God. He's beautifully holy. And this way of living is going to get you closer to him. And I think that if we fell into it, and I think that's what we're going to go into with the other ones, that people don't want cotton candy foundational fluff that is going to, again, it's going to please the people that have grown up in the church for 50 years that are just so excited to hear the next sermon on baptism. For others, I think we have to be real first. And I think that holiness and being real with people would pay in dividends versus some of the mistakes that both ditches are falling into.
For sure.
Yeah.
So here's where we create some cognitive dissonance, because I think we're onto something, that people really do want this thing that's different. They want, like you said, they're not happy. They want to feel connected to something bigger than themselves, that there is more than just this life. There's more than just what's here on earth and the material, the scientific and all that. And we can tell them there is, but here's the problem. When they do that, they've got to accept some things they don't want to accept. And that's these next few we're going to get to. We're going to start with firm gender teaching, that there are men and there are women, and that they are created for different things. And somebody says, well, I want the holiness, I want the God thing. I want to feel different. I want to feel like I'm stepping out of the world. I want all that, but I don't want this. Sorry, you don't get both. You have to give up the things that you like about the world to get the things you like about God. And this is that first one that churches really, as much as is possible, have gotten into this habit of going, okay, let's, in fact, I've written on this. I might have brought it up on the podcast before. The idea of complementarianism, which is the dominant view of male-female relationships in even in conservative Bible-believing churches, it's a sham. It was made up in the 80s to appease feminism that was already in the church. It was something that looking back, It was John Piper, Wayne Grudem got together, and we had women entering, the workforce, the military, politics, in numbers like never before. Like it had been firmly established for decades at that point. They were not going to tell them, hey, actually, women are to be keepers at home. Women are not to rule society. Women are not, like, biblically, it's this. They came up with this compromised position that's left nobody happy. It's not working. It's backsliding in churches where they're starting to let women preach and do more and more things because it was never a firm line that they were drawing.
Right.
All in the service of trying to tell people you can have your worldliness and your Christianity. You can't. Right. And so this make or break point is, will we be firm on gender roles?
Well, so this is hugely important when it comes to living out a holy life. You can't live out a holy life when your function is distorted, or when the function has been, reversed. When a man is behaving, weakly, and he's not leading, or when a woman is behaving like the head of the household, there's not only not going to be holiness, which I think is the original thing. I mean, it's right off the bat, there's not going to be holiness, but you go further down the line, it lends itself to, you're speaking to the lack of happiness and the lack of, the thing that strikes me is we peddled this feminist lie. Women, you're going to be happier if you go to work, and if you don't have kids, and if you climb the career ladder, and if you get that trophy that the guy have, you break through the glass ceiling, all this kind of stuff, you're going to be happier that way. But there's a direct relationship between that movement and the the height of the mental health epidemic that we're having. How many women are on some kind of antidepressant? Why is that? Aren't we supposed to be happier because we did this? I mean, that was the thing. You're going to be happy. Satan always promises. He promises, pleasure. He brings only pain. And we're in the pain, and we're trying to say, hey, the pain is because of church hurt. The pain is because of some other issue. It's like, no, the pain is because we've refused to be holy and submit to who God made us to be. Men be men, women be women, accept it and live it out. And there's something glorious in it. When I listened to this great little piece the other day, was talking about, you take a woman she's at home, she's in the kitchen, she's baking, and people are going to come over and say, someone will look at it and they'll say, all you're doing is making food. What a low life. You're not noticed by anybody. There's no accolade. There's no recognition. And he said, no, she's not making food. She's fostering hospitality. She's feeding souls. She's creating humans. She's literally doing the most important function in the world. It's glorious and it's awesome. And women need to get back to that. You're not happy in what you're doing. So let's do it God's way.
Yeah, it's amazing. I would almost call it breadcrumbing through history. And when I say breadcrumbing, I mean throwing out some kind of small reward that basically placates you, while meanwhile you're selling the farm under the table, or having it sold out from under you. So look at feminism, and what do you have? Women can vote, women can own land, women can work. These are all things that are, again, ingrained in us, and just societally we go, okay, well, this is a universal good that this has happened. But the hard part is, if you look at the fruits of the feminism that have gotten us here, and that's where it becomes the most clear to me. The clarity just opens up when you go, oh my goodness, what have we traded for this feminism? What have we given away to get to this point? And what makes it so difficult is, I don't recall, I was homeschooled most of my life. I went from kindergarten through second grade, but during that period, I don't remember being sat down and instilled with these feminist virtues. Like, I never had the class where it's like, okay, now we're going to sit down and teach you this rule book. And yet hearing these things, and I'm not talking about for the person at the Pride Parade and the woman who's, the girl boss CEO. I'm saying for Christians in the pews, when they hear this stuff, it smacks them in the face and sounds so backward and countercultural, because we have been catechized by Disney for 5 decades or 6 decades or however long. We've been catechized by our entertainment, by our books, by all the talking points that we've heard. This whole story has been spun to where, again, and we could get into the whole, the CRT, the victim mindset, that women are victims. Again, I don't think we need to exegete the most recent Barbie movie or whatever that came out, but again, this mindset that ultimately comes down to we've got to subvert the order. And it's amazing. It goes back to Genesis chapter 3, right? In pain you'll bring forth children. Your desire will be for your husband. And again, there's the language there is a little bit weird and subversive, but it certainly seems to be saying you're always going to want to be stepping up on the ladder over the top of him. You're going to want, and again, you're not allowed to say this, but look at most any situation of authority. You will see this play out in almost every context in life, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be in a church, whether it be in politics. It's never enough for equality. It's always the first step towards subverting the order.
Well, you brought up the Barbie thing, and I didn't see it, but there was a quote going, like the monologue that was a central part of the movie. And I just wrote a whole article about this last week. So I'm going to keep this point brief. You can go read it if you want on the Church Reset Substack. Her monologue, one of the lady characters was, it's impossible to be a woman today. We've got all these standards. We got to do this. We got to do that. We got to feed our family. We got to work. We got to do this. We got to, and it's like, you're right. You're absolutely right. This is impossible. It's not our fault. It's feminism's fault. It's the fact that you think you have to do all this because you're trying to be a man and a woman. It doesn't work. Yeah, of course you're unhappy. Of course this doesn't work. And this is the kind of thing that, again, churches have been afraid to address this, to really upset the women of the church, because that's a lot of the times where the power center is. And boy, they can get mad and stir up a hornet's nest. And so they won't say these things. And so we let people go on. No, it's not helping people by not telling them you were designed for this and it's better if you do. And as I said before, all the good things you want out of religion, you can't have if you're going to hang on to this. You are not going to get close to God while hanging on to your worldliness, while planting your foot in that camp and then trying to drag closer to God. Well, if your foot's still there, you're stuck there. You've got to let it go. And so this is the kind of thing that you start talking about and people get mad about. People don't entertain this. People really want, well, what about men? Yeah, they got stuff to do too. I mean, there's a give and take of patriarchy. Is we need good, virtuous, honorable men. We absolutely do. Men have messed up a lot of things. Women have messed up a lot of things. The only way back in this is not to say, well, it's your fault, because that's what Adam and Eve did. How did that work for us? Didn't work out real well to point, say, well, their fault, their fault. No, take your job and figure out, what am I supposed to do here? As a woman, as a man, God laid it out so plainly from the beginning and throughout scriptures. And we just see functionally, it works when we do it. It's a disaster when we don't.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting how feminism said no gender distinctions. Women can do anything that men want to do. Women, go do it. Go to the front lines, climb the career ladder, leave your homes, leave your kids, give them to somebody else. Let's just do this. There's no difference here. And then when that happened, men abandoned their duties. Men abandoned their posts. Men left their roles that they were called to be living in by God. And you get, then you get the women saying, look, masculinity is toxic. And it's like, no, masculinity isn't toxic. What's toxic is men abandoning their posts, men using their masculinity outside of the domain that it's supposed to be. Men are supposed to be strong and provisional and courageous within a certain context, protecting their wives, protecting their children. But when you remove the idea of gender distinctions, you just get women unhappy because they're out in the man's field, and then men have left altogether. And there's kind of this toxic thing going on there. And again, it's just interesting to me that we're seeing, like, society will point out the flaws. They'll say, here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem, but they don't want to go to how to fix it. They just, like you said, they want to point the finger and pass the buck.
Wow. All right. So once you've got that established, what a man's supposed to be, what a woman's supposed to be, very closely related to that. And this is one, I think, as I said before, I think people would expect to be on our list of make or break issues. Number 4, clarity on sexuality. I mean, you know what a man is, we know what a woman is, so we can get past the transgender thing because of, and everybody gets how absurd that is. But I think there's still a lot of stuff about sexuality that Christianity is getting wrong, and not that the Bible gets it wrong, but that the church has gotten wrong about how we address it and the tone we take towards it, and this whole thing of, well, the church has been so mean to homosexuals. Well, hold on, I don't know that we have. I think that's accepting the world's framing on the thing, but we got to start it with the unique damage of sexual sin and realizing that when we take a firm stand and say, here's, thus saith the Lord on this, that is the best thing that anybody will ever do to these people. Because we don't really believe in, going back to the start, we don't believe in God's holiness, God's difference. We don't believe that being near to God is the best thing that you could do. And we don't believe that sin is a cancer that is eating you up from the inside. And that's what 1 Corinthians 6 talks about, that, you know, that you're sinning against your own body with these sexual sins, how devious, how disgusting, how bad it is. And Romans 1 confirms this. You know, this is so unnatural, these ways that people are going down. And that if you can bring somebody out of that, that is the best thing that has ever been done for them. As painful as it is for them to hear, as offensive as a lot of them think that you're being, telling them these things that nobody else will tell them, everybody else is applauding them as they run headlong into hell, you would be the person who loves them more than anybody. Not hurting them, not hating them, loving them.
The cultural idea of love is really the antithesis of the biblical idea of love. The cultural idea of love is don't offend. Affirm whatever the person happens to be. We see that breaking out in a number of ways in society, in therapy world, and in just our understanding of morality. But in Romans 12:9, this is striking to me. Paul says, let love be without hypocrisy. And it's followed by two participial phrases. Abhorring, so let love be without hypocrisy. Abhorring what is evil, clinging to what is good. The way that love is not hypocritical, in other words, the way that love is genuine through and through, is when you hate what is evil. And the word he uses there is only used once in the whole Bible, but it's like, it's the strongest kind of hatred that exists. It is a vehement abhorrence of something. You let love be without hypocrisy. It literally says, some versions say genuine. The word, it's like hypokritos. It means literally without hypocrisy, and then abhorring what is evil. That's the only way. That's the only way that a love is genuine, is if you hate what is evil. So you look on your transgender neighbor and you look on your homosexual neighbor, the way you love them is by hating the thing that's destroying them and by calling them back to what is truly good.
Yeah. As we're talking about this, you mentioned, Jack, this accusation that the church has been mean to homosexuals and how that's kind of accepting a false framing. I will say, I think the church has done poorly on sex in both directions. I think we're bad at it. I think we're bad at talking about it. I don't think we've addressed it well. Obviously in the negative sense, but also in the positive sense. We are and I want to say, I don't think that means that the church, we should be openly flagrant and I'm trying to think of the word. I don't think we should be pushing the envelope every sermon. A pastor so and so who has his bed set up in the middle of the auditorium and calls his wife down, to make the point. Obviously, it gets in very poor taste. But I think, again, it goes back to with the idea of sex and sexual sin. One, we're afraid to talk about sex at all, in any sense, positive or negative. And so again, number two, when I think about that fact, I go back to, as I was growing up, we can't necessarily call out these things. One, because we're afraid of offending those outside. Two, because we're just afraid of offending those inside the church. Well, old, Grandma Ethel, if we talk about sex, she's going to get offended on this day. When in reality, we live in maybe one of the most oversexed societies in history. Now, again, the pornography addiction, I think we'll talk about in just a minute. Pornography is your sin. If you're a porn addict, it's your sin. You need to repent and get it fixed. If you are, a same-sex attracted person, that is not holy. Those desires are not good. And yet, I don't want to use the word victims, but we have people that are hurting because of this. They are hurt. It's hurting them. It's sending them on the path to hell. And I think the way that we've talked about sexual sin is as something far off. I've literally heard sermons where preachers say pornography, people, these sickos in their mom's basement, these sickos that are looking at this stuff. Dude, it's most of the men in your congregation. It's most of the people in your church. And I think that, again, we have to strike that balance with sexual sin of, yes, don't make the sin any less, but realizing that it's infiltrated our ranks. It's all over the place inside the church. We can't give place to it. There's never a room to give place to it. But we have to realize it's probably the most prominent struggle that most Christians in our churches are having today. And so we have to speak boldly about it, but we also have to realize, and I'm the chief of sinners, we have it here. It's not the out there thing. It's inside our ranks. And I think we've done badly talking about it.
We have. Yeah. And I'm real big on that. We're more culturally influenced than we realize. We all think we're all just individuals choosing things, making decisions. No, because somebody 50 years ago, and that preacher that's talking about, the sickos with their, in fact, I was at a preacher's meeting I've talked about before where one of the guys got up and just said, well, just tell these perverts to repent. Like, dude, come on, man. But here's the other thing is he didn't grow up in a time where every kid had access to every pornographic image ever produced in his pocket at all times. Yeah. Like, if you don't understand that and the pull that it's going to be on a kid, that culturally kids are pulled into that. Culturally, if a kid is depressed and has a bad week at school, somebody's planting in their mind, well, it's probably because you're a girl. It's probably because you're actually a boy. It's probably because you're gay. It's probably because of the, if you have a bad breakup with your little middle school girlfriend, which you shouldn't have in the first place, parents, but that's neither here. Well, no, it's not here, there, but it's just a different rabbit trail. But, these kids that, okay, you have a bad breakup. Well, okay, maybe I'm gay. Nobody over the age of 30 had to deal with that. You have to realize what people are being subjected to. And the only way you can usefully fight against that kind of influence is to produce a counterculture that tells kids, no, that's not thinkable. That's not the direction we're going. That's not how that is. When you have a bad day, it's because you had a bad day. It's not because you're gay or because you're trans. When, you hit that age and you start desiring sex, sorry, your phone is not a place to relieve that outlet. Because the other thing that ends up happening is they get hooked on that. And then we have the marriage rate statistic in the church that matches exactly with the ones in the world of like, oh, well, people aren't getting married till 28. I'm sorry. They are not holding off completely. Most people decades into their sexual desire into, post-puberty and all that. Where are they getting it? They're either fornicating or porn. Okay. And so because we don't have this, there's this cascading effect of all the bad things because we don't have a culture that says it's not good for you to be alone. So get married. You can't have sex outside of this. You're not all these other things. As you said, we don't have it because we don't talk about it.
There has to be gatekeeping. So, you talk about there's going to be a dad who's there telling his kid, if they hear one of these lies, he's going to be there to address it. He's going to be there to expose it through Christian lens. But at the same time, there should be some protection from it. There should be gatekeeping. If your kid is hearing messages about maybe you're trans, maybe you're gay, maybe you're a girl, or maybe you're a boy, I would say as a parent, maybe you should remove your kid from such environments. Why are we putting our kids who are as moldable as clay into a place where that's the kind of messaging that they're hearing? This is going to demand that we make some big changes, but there has to be gatekeeping if we love their souls. Bring them to a place where we can actually have some control over these environments and control over the things that they're listening to. For one, they shouldn't have a cell phone, at all. And if they're still in the home, when they do get a cell phone, it needs to have a lot of parental controls. A dad's going to be there overseeing it as the patriarch of the family, as the priest for the family, and he's going to be watching and paying attention to this. But
here's part of the problem. There's a lot of the dads that can't handle this because they're sorry, go ahead. I probably just jumped your point.
That's exactly where I'm going. That's the other problem is dads need to repent because I think that's a huge, you talk about, you're not going to go be a courageous warrior for Jesus Christ if you know that you yourself are living in darkness. And neither are you, as much as you would say you love your kids, neither are you going to try and do that gatekeeping for them, because this isn't sincere. This is hypocritical. I'm personally telling them and demanding things of them that I wouldn't do myself. So it starts with dads repenting. If a father is living in sin, he does need to repent. He needs to change, come out of the darkness, step into the light, and then lead family. Because look, we're looking at eternal souls. These are our kids. Where are they going to be for all eternity? What matters most? That they be cool among their peers, or that we protect them and raise them in the nourishment and admonition of the Lord and prepare them for where they're going to live for eternity.
Yeah, I think, we stand around wringing our hands sometimes and going like, how did this happen? How did we get to this point? I think culturally, and maybe this is just off the hip, you guys can agree or disagree. I think it's amazing that we go from the generation of boomers who seems in some ways are unable to commit anything wrong ever. Like they don't make mistakes. Sliding right into the summer of love, the sexual revolution, what happened there? You have a generation of parents that grew up again with societal mores being totally shifted. Everything changed. They grew up again. My parents grew up in an era where their parents could watch anything on TV, any movie. There was never a question. Oh, it's on, you can watch it. My parents grew up in a generation where their parents had no clue the things that were being put on TV and put into movies. And so you have a generation that came out of the children of the sexual revolution that had no guidance, that they didn't realize what they were being subverted into. They have our generation, and they have all of these sexual skeletons in their closet that they're ashamed of. But they come from a generation that doesn't know how to confess its sins. Then they have these sexual sins, and they have kids that they can't talk to about sex, because if I talk to them about sex, then I'm going to have to reveal I made mistakes. I had major issues. And as I move forward in my life, I'm the chief of sinners. I have sexual skeletons in my closet. I hope that with my kids, I have the humility to say, hey, here's what I did wrong. Here's how I messed up. I'm a sinner. I need Jesus's grace. And I'm telling you this so that you can avoid the same problems that I made. And I think generationally, we've come from a generation that, has been ashamed of the things in their past, and I can empathize with that, but we can't let that shame keep us from pointing the next generation in the right direction.
For sure.
So that's authenticity with holiness and repentance undergirding it. So we spoke earlier about how this is I think there's even an app that's called Be Real or something. Isn't there an app that's like that where you be real? We want that. But and there's a truth in it, right? There's a truth in being real, but be real. And so a person who's in the darkness, if they're real about it, they're actually going to be more at peace in the darkness than a person who's not being real about being in the darkness. So it's a step in the right direction, but God is calling us to be real and then move toward holiness. So as you're talking about, there does need to be that kind of vulnerable, humble, open way of saying, look, I've sinned. I've messed up. I don't want you to make the same mistakes. Let me talk to you about this. But at the same time, it's coming from the standpoint of being repentant and having left that behind. And you now know, look, the promise of pleasure, it really wasn't there. In the end, she was as bitter as wormwood, or, whatever the proverb writer would say.
So you getting at something, Titus, there. I'm going to jump over one of our points. We had a point about the family, but we've kind of hit on that enough, just the importance of children, but we got to some of that already. So for time's sake, and because I think you transitioned us well into it with this point of generational issues, as we're talking about make or break things, this will be the last one on our list. We've got to figure out how to get the generational thing right. I mean, it's so powerful that the end of the Old Testament, our Old Testament, it wasn't the end of the Hebrew Old Testament. They arranged a little differently, but Malachi, that, when John's going to come, Jesus is going to come, he's going to return the hearts of the sons to the fathers and the fathers to the sons. That's restoration. That's change. That's positivity. That's things going in the right direction. We don't have that right now. And so this make or break thing is getting that right, bringing the generations back together. And that's two can tango. You know, boomers and millennials are famously against each other, but you got Gen X in there. You got Gen Z coming along. You've got, everybody looks at the people. And every time we talk about this, I get somebody going, well, it's always been that way. It's always been the maybe, but we're in a particularly bad point. There is, because of the internet, it is such a generational divide, almost like never seen before, of the way we live our lives has been changed so drastically. We've got a lot more to overcome than the problem that's always been there. Number one. Number two, this is something that bothers me. Everybody acknowledges, like I said before, we live in Sodom and Gomorrah. Times are so bad. Kids these days and the world, oh, it's just in decline. It's all falling apart. Who oversaw that? Who was in charge for that? Who has been in charge for the last 30, 40, 50 years? The people who are blaming the problems on today's youth, the people who raised today's youth and who raised the parents of today's youth, the people who, just voted all these things in, socially lived through all these things, oversaw this entire decline, and now want to turn and put the blame on. And as Titus said, it takes confession, it takes repentance. And when you see in the Bible, generationally, they get things right, it's people going, man, we messed up. What we did was wrong. That's not okay. Let's fix this. Let's own our mistakes and go back and do it. We don't have Christian parents owning their mistakes. We don't have them owning that, hey, we let our kids watch whatever they wanted and it didn't end well. They didn't own that, man, we were all feminists who put our kids in daycare and didn't, we got our home structure all wrong and that's wrong and don't do what we did. We don't have people saying that. And if things are going to change, that needs to happen.
So it starts with confession. Like I one time heard this, he is a pretty big name minister who was relaying a conversation he had with his son, where he said, son, if I could have done anything differently, what would it have been? And the son said, well, I always had this idea that you were perfect, that you never did any wrong. And when I became a man, I realized that wasn't true. I wished that along the way you would have confessed some of your sin and that you would have been apologetic about it. And here's the thing. When you do that with your kids, I may be too harsh at times with my sons and get onto them in a way that I shouldn't, or, maybe I react too quickly and I don't know the full story. I have to take them aside. And this is, I understand we're talking about big generations, but the generation between me and my son, which is the one that directly impacts me, is just being honest enough to say, I reacted too quickly. I'm sorry, buddy. Can I give you a hug? I messed up. And being real. So he sees the standard, he sees the imperfection of his father, but there's also humility and repentance. So he knows, okay, when I did something wrong, I can confess this and it's not the end of the world. But when we sweep it under the rug and keep pretending like there was no problem, it creates this big difference.
My dad was once told by an elder in the church, don't ever apologize to your kids or tell them you did something wrong. It will destroy your authority.
Oh my gosh.
This is what we're dealing with. You're exactly right that approach is what it would solve so much of this. And that's literally the opposite of the approach that's out there.
Yeah, you have to parent in such a way that at some point you step back and you point to God, to your kids, and say, look, I'm in need of grace. Okay. In this house, nobody's perfect. We have a standard. We follow God's standard, but I'm not perfect, and again, it doesn't destroy your authority. You just funnel that respect straight up to the main source of authority and who they're really looking for. And so, I was actually the one that recommended this for the outline about this generational shift. I'm going to relate what happened to me personally. And if people relate, that's great. COVID happened. We all remember that. Seems like a nightmare and a far off dream, but it happened not that long ago. COVID happened and everything got swept up into this COVID craze. And again, I was part of a congregation that for a time, the elders doing what they thought best, we closed our doors. And I'm not here to question their decision on that, and what they did for our congregation. But during that period, I was left as a Christian, who the primary source of my knowledge that I was a Christian was that I was going to church. I went to church. I taught Bible classes. I led singing. That's how I knew I was a Christian. Once that was taken away from me, even for a couple of weeks, I had a major identity crisis. I went, Oh my goodness. My Christianity is tied into this service and this building. And outside of it, with that taken away, I have no identifying mark. When that happened, I came out of COVID. I'm not saying I came out like Jack's, like, and healthy like Jack did. But I came out spiritually on fire. Like, I'm not content to just keep this going and keeping the status quo, because I looked at a world around me that seemed to be on fire. And the fact of the matter is, we have a generational shift, not only in larger society, but in the church. We have an older generation that we're 10 to 20 years from them being, working their way out of life. I'm trying to say that as delicately as I can, but people die, generations shift. And what we have, I'm afraid, is we have young people that are looking at a world on fire and going, I want my kids to be able to live and thrive under the lordship of Jesus and have a healthy, happy life. And we have a generation that went ahead of us going, see you guys, I'm on the way out. We've talked about before, it doesn't matter if it all burns down. I'm on my way out. I had my good years, do your best. We'll see you. And I think that's causing major friction, because again, some of what this looks like is upending the status quo a little bit, revisiting some things and saying, hey, we need to make a change here. And everybody's so afraid that, well, you're saying Billy Bob Joe that died 20 years ago, you're saying that he wasn't right because he was part of this generation. Look, God's grace to Billy Bob Joe, I have no question. God's graceful. We all make mistakes. Our generation will make mistakes. But I just see moving forward this thought, again, post-COVID, of as this shift is happening, it has to cut both ways. The younger generation has to have our hands out to say, we want to take on this leadership. We want to be involved. But the older generation, look, why are all of our action movie stars 80 years old? Why does Harrison Ford have to be the action movie hero of today? The same action movie heroes we've had for the last 50 years is because, again, the younger generation's unwillingness at times to take the leadership, but the older generation's unwillingness to let loose that grasp and bring us into this movement, because we're the ones that are going to be living inside of this church. We're the ones that are going to be living in this world. We have to be allowed, and on the other hand, we must take responsibility in a hand in this body that we are going to be leading once this generation's gone.
So one of the things as you're speaking that comes to mind that we need to remove, that I think is exacerbating the issue, is you got things like children's church. And you see this in some of the bigger churches of Christ where they literally separate out the kids. And so there's like an intentional separation between the generations. It's, hey, we've got our youth. You guys go over here and you do your thing. The big adults will do the big stuff. And that separation, that's creating a chasm right there. And we're literally doing it. So that's one thing. We need to bring the church back together. When you read in the Bible, the church was all there. Grandma, granddad, mom, dad, little babies. They were all there under one roof, worshiping God together. Yeah, it's a little bit messier. You got a little kid screaming, but you know what? That's a lot better than separating them out and pretending like worship is just totally this quiet space where everything's cookie cutter and perfect, because it isn't. Sometimes, worship is with a loud screaming kid right there, and you're trying to worship God and you're addressing this next generation and teaching them at the same time. There's something beautiful and glorious about that, as hard as it is. So that's one thing that we need to do. And another thing that I was thinking is, we were kind of mentioning beforehand, our generation, we don't have any skills. Like, we know how to play video games. Well, I don't, but we touch those up, but we don't know how to do anything practical, right? We know how to do like a couple things with technology, but that's about it. The older generation knows all these things. And look, you become a young man, you get married, you don't have any money, you get a plumbing problem or something breaks in your house. Who's going to fix it? You don't. I'll just say this. I realized very quickly how expensive the world was when I got married, because it's like, oh, dang, I got to fix this. Well, what should be happening, I think, and one way to remedy the generational gap is older men taking the younger men to say, hey, you got a plumbing issue? Like, the young man should be able to call up that boomer and say, hey, I got a leaky faucet or whatever, and him come over and spend that time and teach him. and you're creating a bond there, but it's also passing on something to that next generation. I think that's going to be a really valuable way to bring the generations back together.
It is. It's about passing off and receiving. It's a baton, and if you're not willing to let go of the baton, you're going to keep running and burn out, and then the race is over. If you try and rip the baton out of somebody's hands, it's not going to go well either. And so there's very much give and take that neither side has been good at to this point. And Daniel's exactly right. Keeping us separated to the degree that we have, you've got your children's church, children's classes, youth group, college group, singles, young professionals, young families, and then your senior citizens. And then there's just kind of that like 30s, 40s, 50s group that kind of hangs out. And and so like generationally, of course, we don't get along. We don't spend any time together. We don't, it's kind of you go over here, you go over here. And all of that has cut us off from, you just read about people, the founding fathers, but just older documents and stuff. They talk about posterity and inheritance and passing something on and being part of something, a line of the generation that came before you. And then, our predecessors, the older people today, have not viewed things that way. We've talked before about the whole, when I die, I'm taking it all with me. I think Titus made that point a minute ago. When you act that way, it makes perfect sense that the generation today would go, I'm not going to have kids. I'm the end of the line. That this is a lineage that literally goes back to the start of time that ends with me, because it basically it all existed to produce me and let me watch Netflix and travel a little bit. That was the purpose of all of this reproduction, and I'm going to stop it right here and call it a day. It's insanity. But again, like I said, it only makes sense that people did that when the generation that came before them said, you don't matter. It's all about me. And so we've got to get out of the selfishness and realize the ones that came before us have something valuable that we need to learn from. Like Daniel said, call them up and learn from them. But if you're older, you've got to realize, pass something on. Don't just say, well, good luck, guys. You're on your own. Like, think bigger beyond yourself.
Well, and one thing that I want to add to this that relates to the same point is, I'm speaking right now directly to the older generation. If anybody in the older generation is listening, these younger guys, they want to know this stuff. They really do. Like it's part of what we're made for. We're made to be able to fix things. We're made to be able to create things. God put that within us, and nobody's content or happy to not know how to do anything. It's not really a fulfilling way of being a man. So there's an inherent desire there, but you also see it working out practically. There's this YouTube channel that's, I can't even remember the name of it, but it's basically a guy who's trying to be a dad for anybody on YouTube. And he just shows basic things, how to rotate your tires, how to change your oil, a number of basic things like that. And he's like, he has millions of followers, of young people in the young generation that missed these things. And they're looking to him for wisdom and for help and for, I mean, it's amazing to me. He's not even real. He has no real connection with them. He's not their father. He doesn't know them at all. And yet they're going to him. And so that tells me that there is a need there. And I think that if it'd be interesting to me if churches would open up, some kind of program, like a mentoring type program, or, the older men are like, hey, we're going to teach some younger men in our community. I wonder what would happen. Would that create some, maybe even some church growth? Because the desire's there.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, we have to create a culture that can offer something opposite the other culture. And that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I think, as we kind of come to a close here, I want to say something kind of neutral and scary. And then I want to say a couple positive things because I feel like I've maybe been super negative this episode. The scary neutral thing is this. I've seen churches that are moving away. In my congregation, we don't have a youth group, which I think is very smart. We don't have a youth group. We don't have children's church. The elders have made a very concerted effort to make things family oriented, to have everyone together. And they've done a great job with that. The scary thing about that is I would hope eventually more churches move away from that. We've got to move forward to something positive. Okay. We've had this negative. The biggest whiff ever was kids are leaving in college. So we've got to give them children's church and youth group. And it's the biggest whiff, like Charlie Brown trying to kick the football ever. Didn't work. Totally a mistake. Everybody needs to move away from it. Now, as we get into talk of culture creation, this is the scary part. We're going to have to make maybe some changes, some new ideas, some ways to bring ourselves together that people are going to be uncomfortable with. And that's something, again, as we look for our generation moving forward, creating a positive culture, not just moving away from the negative, is going to be a big thing. And I think Jack would be happy to sell you a book soon about how we're going to do that. But now, a couple positive things, if I can end on them. Number one, through this episode, we've talked about generational issues and the issue of the generations that come before. My parents' generation, not perfect. They made mistakes. They weren't perfect parents, much as our generation will. But the generation before, at least in speaking of my parents, we're a generation that I think decided we want to be serious about this Christianity thing. We want to be serious about it, and we want to work hard at it. That's what I saw in my mother and father. And I think that, again, that is invaluable as our generation moves forward and tries to build on top of that. We're building on their foundation. No, they didn't get it all right, but we stand on the shoulders of giants. Even so, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us that want things to be better. And even when that friction between their generation and ours comes, it's part of that growing process. And number two, the second positive thing I want to say is this: for all my talk of COVID and coming out and feeling this friction between the generations, I don't know what to call it besides the movement of the Spirit, the work of the Spirit, that I think that across our country, we have pockets of people in our brotherhood that are looking around at each other like their eyes have been open, going, we've got to do something. What are we? Something's got to happen. There's a change that needs to happen. And I think that, Jack, your Church Reset book speaks to that. I think the existence of this podcast speaks to that. There seems to be an awakening of sorts. I don't want to call it the third great awakening, but there's this awakening happening where people in the church want more. They want more opportunities to have Jesus as their Lord. They want more opportunities to build this culture. And so we aren't, of all people, to be most pitied in that, oh, woe is me. We have these moments. These are make or break things that we have opportunities to move in the right direction on. And we can make a beautiful church culture all through God, all through the work of the Spirit, not of ourselves. If it's up to Jack, Daniel, and Titus to build the perfect blueprint of the church, then sorry guys, it's already done. But with God on our side, with the Spirit, with the Word, with all these things, we have every opportunity to succeed. God can do great things through us, and we have to believe He's able to do that.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. That conversation needs to be being had between preachers from our generation and elders from the other generation, because I'm seeing, as you're talking, the majority of those who are feeling this big urgency to move and to make some changes, seems to me that it's in the younger generation. It's in those who are not nearing the end, and those that are going to have to deal with this for the remainder of their lives. And there has to be an open conversation. And I do think that there are exceptions to this, but between the preachers and the elders to say, look, here's a problem that I see coming down the road that I know in 20 years I'm going to have to be dealing with. What can we start doing about that now? And that conversation has to be being had between both groups. Not just, again, what we have to avoid is remaining on the trajectory we've always been on. We can't say, well, we're just going to keep doing it the way it's always been done. There has to be the conversation and a willingness to say, okay, we're going to try something to do. And I do think COVID kind of opened us up to that.
Yeah, it is a cultural sinking ship, as we started off talking about with this episode. And the people who are going to die before it totally sinks, they're okay writing it out. They're okay with the status quo. Those of us that, Lord willing, are going to be around and have to raise our families in the aftermath of a sunken ship, we're a little more motivated to change things. I mean, that's where this is coming from. But we would love the help from generations and the wisdom that they do have. And so it's imperative that we all work together. And I think these make or break issues we've covered are the ones that are going to determine how we swim out of the wreckage, how we move on to something better. How do we rebuild out of what's falling apart around us culturally? And so I'd be interested to hear, are there other make or break issues that people think these are the big ones? These are the things that need to change. If you got that, drop it in the comments, YouTube, or our Facebook page. Let us know. This has been a fun season. Lord willing, we will be back I don't know, in a month or so. I think we talked about we're going to try and get a run in pre-Christmas for season 3. And so I want to thank everybody for listening. As always, check out the Facebook page, share the posts, the quotes. It really helps spread the word. And or the reels, we're putting up those videos, those little short ones on Facebook. Those do really well. So if you'll share those, that helps us out a bunch. And of course, podcast ratings. I'm trying to remember everything else I need to say before we go dark for a while. So Daniel,
if we get 100 shares, I'm just putting this out here. I haven't even told my wife this. I will grow a handlebar mustache.
Oh boy,
we can get 100 shares on this.
Come on,
I was
guys.
so hoping the Psalms episode. I mean, I thought we were going to get it on that. I thought the reverse mohawks were going to be enough, but you know,
the Little Brown Church in the Vale, 4-part harmony.
I know
that recording will just have to stay in the dark.
I know. Yeah, I was going to say I've got it sitting in my back pocket right here, never to be released. But no, it's been so fun. Thank you guys for inviting me on for this season. I've so enjoyed it. It's been a great time, and I'm excited for the road ahead.
Yeah, I think everybody would agree. Titus has been a perfect pickup where Jacob left off. And so we're looking forward to bringing him back another season. That was just jokes last time about the rotating third chair. So we will talk to you guys, Lord willing, in a couple of months.